Welcome. I'm Dan Daly, and welcome to Dan Daly Business Commentary. Today, we're going to focus on some of the things that are going on at a very rapid pace in the second or third week of the Trump administration. Now, I know that many of us, myself included, are reluctant to discuss politics with our friends, neighbors, business associates, etc. So there'll be no discussion of politics today, but what I think is important is to get people's opinions, leaders, executives in corporate America, and members of the board on what they think is going on today, primarily driven by the Trump administration and how it might impact their company or their organization. We're going to be talking about public companies, we're going to be talking about private companies, we're going to be talking about for-profit and nonprofit. So things are going very, very quickly. And we talked to a lot of friends who would talk to us in a friendly manner, and just to get their opinion on what they saw as potential challenges, obligations, and risks to their companies or obligation relative to things that are going on. And I think we all have to admit things are moving very, very quickly. Some of them are positive, some of them not so positive, but they are moving quickly, and you cannot ignore them or wait for them to happen. They could be an opportunity, or they could be a risk to your company or your organization. So let's focus a little bit on the two subjects. One is DEI, and what is the Trump administration doing regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion? That's point number one. Point number two is just as important, and for some of you more important. What are they doing regarding funding, cash, to certain organizations? And that can be a contract with the Department of Defense, the contract with Health and Human Services, or it could be some other entity giving your nonprofit funding. It could be homeless, it could be veterans, or something like that. So focusing on your program, your position on DEI, number one. Second, where are you regarding the potential and risk to your funding from a contract or a cash standpoint from the Trump administration? So we'll focus on the two of those. Let's start with DEI. Now, DEI, the Trump administration has taken a very strong stand against DEI. It is eliminating it from a great many federal organizations, and that eventually, in our opinion, is going to spread over to corporate America. Now, let me give one catchphrase here. We are not accountants. We are not lawyers. What we are is sharing with you, commenting on the remarks and suggestions and comments we heard from various friends and advisors who are currently executives or members of the board. Again, repeating, we are not lawyers. We are not accountants. Now, that is not to say that you shouldn't be talking to those two people as your advisors. You should be. What we're doing is we're taking comments and sharing them with you. You may agree with some of the comments. You may not. All right. So let's start up. DEI. Now, DEI is the Trump administration has taken a very strong stand on eliminating that. Eliminating that from the websites, eliminating that from the policies of federal agencies, federal organizations. We think there's a very real possibility that that will extend over and they will target corporations. Now, if that happens, you should be prepared for it. So our suggestion and some of the comments we've heard there is look and see on your public stands, whether it's the website or things that you've written, et cetera, what is your DEI policy, all right? And how strong is it? How defined is it? And the suggestions that we heard from individuals that are helping us and sharing the thoughts with you is perhaps tone it down a bit. Some companies are leaving it exactly as it is. Others are totally removing it. I think at a minimum, you have the appropriate people, multiple people. And the appropriate people are not just your director of HR. It's not just your corporate counsel. And it probably is not just your outside lawyer or your accountant. It's a group of people that say, that's a little bit strong. It's important for us. We'll keep it in there, but we'll tone it down a bit. And that's what's important. Suggestion, tone it down a bit. Now, let me give you some background on thinking in terms of that. All right. If it gets stronger that companies are going to be obligated, maybe legally or something like that, to change that policy. Where do you stand from a protection standpoint? I'm going to read something that we've always been very strong supporters of, and many of you may know it. Certainly you at the members of the board level will know it, but also senior executives. It's called the Business Judgment Rule. And I'm just going to quote something from the Cornell Law School, and it refers to the Business Judgment Rule. And I'm quoting, "In suits alleging a corporation's directors violating their duty of care to the company, courts will evaluate the case based on the Business Judgment Rule." They will evaluate the case on the Business Judgment Rule. This was to say, if some entity on the federal level or some agency moved against your company legally, we want to reference the Business Judgment Rule. Under this standard, a court will uphold the decision of a director, and to a lesser extent an executive, as long as they are made, the decisions, 1, in good faith, made the decision in good faith. 2, with the care that is reasonably prudent, this reasonably prudent person would use. So duty of care. And 3, with the reasonable belief that the director is acting in the best interests of the company. That is what is known as the duty of care. That you made the decision in good faith, you were cognizant of it, you researched it, you did it as best you could, and you thought you were doing it in the best interest of the corporation or the organization. That is the duty of care, and that gives you some protection under the Business Judgment Rule. And that is very, very important. There's no guarantee, but if you haven't done those things, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if someone, some entity, some body, a group, etc., comes against you legally. So if you're not familiar with the Business Judgment Rule and the duty of care, and a lesser component, the duty of loyalty, you as a board member, okay, or as a senior executive, should find out and understand it so that you are comfortable that you are following the duty of care and getting the protection of the Business Judgment Rule. If you're going to change your policy, DEI, and you're going to lessen it, strengthen it, maintain it, or get rid of it, then you should be doing that under the Business Judgment Rule and the duty of care so that you are comfortable, because that provides you with some protection. Not absolute, but some protection. Very, very important. And you say, well, I'm with a nonprofit. Well, that's right. You're with a nonprofit. But the Business Judgment Rule will still provide some protection in a nonprofit. Well, certainly that's something you want to research. You want to talk to your lawyer, and you talk to a lawyer who is a litigational lawyer, because they're the ones who use that. So the DEI is a very big target. The Trump administration is focused on it. They're eliminating it from federal agencies, organizations, etc. I think, and a lot of the people that we talk to say, that could very well move over in some fashion to putting restrictions on corporations relative to the strength or the enforcement of their DEI policies. So you got to keep in mind, again, as we've said so many times, it's not business as usual. So focus on DEI. Leave it alone, change it in a small way, change it in a big. That's up to you. We're not telling you what to do, but seek out and find out first of all, find out what you have. Okay, you may not know all the details of your policy. It may be on the website, but it may be 10 other different places in your policy manual within operations of your various divisions, etc. So find out, as a senior executive, a member of the board, what is your DEI policy and where is it applicable? That comes under what? Comes under the duty of care. If you say, oh, we thought it was just fine, I didn't really understand it, then you got a problem. The duty of care goes away because you didn't exercise the duty of care to find out what the policy was. So enough on DEI. Now the other situation, which is very, very interesting and very disturbing, the administration has eliminated certain federal agencies. Okay, USAID being one of them. We've always been a strong supporter of that, but they have eliminated it, and they've laid off people from the EPA. They've laid off people from the FBI, all of which they have the right to do. The president has done that under executive order. So a lot of comments that we heard, all right, were, no, they can't do that. Well, I'm not a lawyer. We're not accountants. We don't know whether they can or cannot do that under executive order. Or someone else said, well, they can't do that because Congress controls it. Both those things may be correct, that he can't do it under executive order, that Congress has to control it. But in the meantime, it may have been done, and that may result on a contract with a government agency canceled for you. More important, or just as important, is the funding for your organization, which could cripple it or eliminate it, may have been eliminated. So the idea that it's unconstitutional, they can't do it, if it takes 6, 12, or 18 months to resolve that they could or could not do it, you could be in a tremendous situation, negatively speaking, in your nonprofit because you have no more money in the bank and you have to close. All right? From a corporate standpoint, you lost unfairly a major contract. All right? That could affect your bottom line. It could get you from black ink into the red. It could impact the price of your stock. It could do a lot of things. So saying that they can't do this could be very correct, but to challenge it, it's not going to turn around in 6, 12, or 18 months. You may get a situation where a federal judge comes in and puts a stay on that particular order, executive order or something. That's a stay. Maybe good for 30, 60 days, but it won't resolve the situation. The situation will only be resolved relative to its legitimacy as it moves through the court system. Federal courts, appeals courts, up to the Supreme Court. I don't think you want to bet your company or your nonprofit organization on the speed with which that challenge moves upward. So what do you do there? You look and you see, where is all my funding coming from? I looked at one nonprofit we were very much involved in, and a third of the money came from individuals, a third came from the state, and a third came from the federal. Well, then you've got to start thinking, okay, can we take those various thirds and can we give ourselves some coverage by getting more from individuals or maybe from the state, because we may lose the Fed. You've got to know who are your stakeholders, who are your supporters, and where are you at risk. Right now, I would think the highest risk comes from some elimination or reduction of federal funding. Where, who, from what, I don't know. Okay, it can be by executive order. It can be by something from Health and Human Services that funds you. It might be something from the Department of Education that impacts the educational institution. Just think of all the money that comes from the federal government that goes into R&D at various educational institutions. This is huge. And if anyone in your team says, oh, it doesn't apply to us, well, I would ask the person on the right and the left, do you agree with so-and-so? This is very serious, and it's the classic example of you have to find out where you are today and what is the risk. All right, where is the risk coming from? What is the likelihood that that risk will be implemented or gotten worse? And what can you do about it? Well, if you're funded by a specific agency within a secretariat, well, you should at least begin to reach out to the appropriate person that may be able to drive a supporting position of your organization from a funding standpoint forward. Don't wait until it happens. Be proactive. Proactive. This applies not to DEI, okay, but it definitely applies to the funding of your organization. And your organization can be for-profit, and a contract with a major government agency with you as a vendor or can be affected. If you're in a big nonprofit, you could find yourself 6 months from now with no money in the bank, and you can't shrink your organization, and your organization tragically closes. So what we're really saying here, we see today in the comments we hear, are two major issues for you to be concerned about today. There may be more of them. They may get diminished. Right now, it's what is your DEI policy? Is it in conflict with the policies of this administration? And how publicly is your commitment to that policy displayed? Okay? Over here, we have funding. Where is the funding coming from? All right, who is likely to continue it? Who is likely to shut it off? And who should you reach out to determine whether that's there? All under the duty of care, because you're not sitting back in the executive suite or in the boardroom saying, well, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. That's not any good, because you are violating the duty of care. You did not investigate as a fiduciary what the risk was to your organization. So if you think you can use the duty of care and the business judgment rule to protect yourself later on when you didn't do anything, that, not even being a lawyer, that's not going to work. So it's important that you talk about it. These are two major issues, all right? Funding, elimination of entities, and DEI. Those are two things that you have to be concerned about today. And I understand, you're running an organization. You could be employing thousands of people. You could be global. And you're saying, well, I can't worry about these things. And I feel for you, okay? But guess what? You also have to worry about, now, you may increase your team. You may put an ad hoc committee together to focus on those so that you can run. Usually in most crises, people will talk to people like yourself. When there's a crisis, they'll put together a crisis team and another group will run the company. So you might very well think of having my operational team, my crisis team. Combining the two together is never a good policy, because things don't get done. So if you're concerned about these, and I'm saying to you, and the people we talk to are saying to you, you might think about this going into a crisis mode and put together a crisis team. Selective people from your company, both at the executive and maybe lower levels, and maybe one or two outsiders, and that's your crisis management team. And it reports in to the same senior executives and members of the board. But don't combine the two. If you've known somebody who's been in a crisis, you might look and say, boy, it worked for them. Well, usually crisis and operational do not work together. They get a conflict and they get distraction. So again, just bringing things to your attention, two major things that we see out there, a focus driven by the Trump administration, good or bad, we're not commenting on that, against DEI and focusing on the elimination of it. Point number one. Point number two, your company, is it a contractor? Is it a vendor? Is it a nonprofit? And what is the risk to your funding? So DEI, where do you stand? Okay, funding, where's your funding at risk? Two major elements. I'm sorry that we don't have answers, but our goal here is really to comment and share with you the statements and advice we've had from people. I certainly would look and bring in outside counsel, maybe a couple of outside counsel, to get their opinion. You know, does the business judgment rule apply? Counsel may say, not in this case. Well, I think it does, but I'm not a lawyer. So get the right people. And when do you start? I would start tomorrow. Why do I say that? Not to be dramatic, but let's look. It's the first week in February, and look at how many things have gotten underway, good, bad, forget the politics. There's a lot going on that most of us never anticipated would be action like this. And then we can combine a few things like military, global, et cetera, et cetera. But these are two issues that you, as a senior executive or a member of the board, as a fiduciary, have to be thinking about, assessing the risk, and determine what action, if any, you're going to take. So we wish you well. As we learn more, we will share them with you. Again, we are not lawyers. We are not accountants. We're simply sharing with you the comments we heard from friends and advisors for whom we have a lot of respect. So best of luck. We look forward to working together.